VRP. I'm Tom Hazard, along with my co-host Tracy Hazard, and today we're going to talk about VR 3D design. VR, AR, XR now, as you say, Tracy, has come a long way, and there are some real practical applications for design of products. There are practical applications in software for visualization and helping to, communicate designs, huge projects in less expensive ways to get budgets approved or to, get to make things happen much quicker, less expensively. And then, of course, the hardware, the computer, hardware itself has come a long way.
So we're going to talk to Shay Sosanya from Gravity Sketch. Shay is a London-based design engineer. He's passionate about traditional forms of making, which I think is so valuable because if you don't know how stuff is made, how are you going to design tools to make it, right? And he has mass production experience, digital production process experience. He holds an MSc in Innovation Design Engineering from Imperial College of London, where he met his co-founder, Daniel Paredes Fuentes, and he's the CEO of Gravity Sketch. He's focusing on the challenges today's traditional digital tools have to empower designers of all disciplines at all levels, right? To become more creative by transforming workflows. His mission is to make emerging technologies more accessible to the broader creative community by building tools that lower barriers to entry with human-centric user experiences.
Wow. Well, with an intro like that, I can't wait to conduct this interview. So let's go there now.
Hey, Shay, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Tracy.
Wow, this has been so interesting, this whole series for us, and getting to explore new technologies, new software, new hardware, all kinds of new things in the process of just producing this episode on VR, XR, as we termed it from our last conversation. So, how long have you been working in this industry, and when did you found Gravity Sketch?
Yeah, so we found Gravity Sketch in 2014, and it was actually on the back of a thesis project. So I was a returning professional to academia with a background in design for manufacturing. I worked for a really big original parts manufacturer in Taipei. And so I had a really close experience with like what it takes to bring something to market and all the different CAD cycles that you have to go through with the design team to manufacturing. And one of the things that we wanted to do in academia was like see if there's a bridge between design and CAD and engineering world. And we felt that everyone speaks through sketches, but those sketches are 2D. And we, as an industrial designer, we sketch in a more emotional, expressive way. And as an engineer, we tend to do the plan views, the 3 views, and maybe an isometric view. And so if there's a way to sketch in 3D, there's really no miscommunication there. It's just what you see is what you get. And so that was the kind of the nugget of what we wanted to address.
Yeah, a lot more valuable, but time consuming, as you know.
Well, what's been fascinating to me in learning about your company and seeing a lot of the videos that you guys have posted about how your software works, that I have not, unfortunately, had the opportunity to actually try it myself. But a number of years ago, we were able to try some things with Microsoft and the HoloLens and some really rudimentary creating of 3D objects in, a VR environment. And at the time, I mean, it was fascinating, but it struck me, that it wasn't very intuitive and they hadn't really worked out a lot of the user interface. Whereas watching videos of what your software does, it seems very natural. I mean, yes, you have to learn how to use the controllers and what, buttons and commands are going to do things, but I can really see how drawing in that 3D space, sketching, as you say, is just a really freeing experience. And I'm fascinated by it. You must have spent a lot of time experimenting, trying to figure out what was going to be the most intuitive sort of ways to create objects. Can you share some about that development?
Yeah, so during the development phase, we really did want to strip away most of that interface that we see when we jump into even like a Photoshop or a CAD package where you have drop-down windows or a command that you need to type or a hotkey. And we wanted to focus on the creative experience itself. So picking up a pencil and putting it to the paper, everyone knows how to do that, from my 4-year-old niece to my mother, who's a school principal. So what we want to do is just figure out how does that experience translate into 3D. And since we use our hands and we gesture, there's kind of like, we have like a foundation that we can build an experience on top of. And so we came up with a couple of rules that guided us through how we implement the user experience. One of which was everything that the user does has to be physically based. So gestural interaction was a really fundamental thing for us, because we did want to span that chasm of people's skill levels. We also wanted to have pretty much minimal to no language in the application. So there's no need for you to read something or click, click, click to access a feature. And then there was the last principle that we wanted to implement was this immediacy. So when you're creating in traditional CAD tools, you might define a spline, then a center line, and then punch in the number of a degree of rotation that you might want to rotate it around that center line. Now that's like 3 steps. And can we cut those 3 steps out with one fluid stroke? And so all these things were kind of the guiding principles for us to go through that process of defining what the right UX scheme is. It's also very helpful that we have industrial designer and manufacturing engineer as the founders of the company. So, we have quite a breadth of experience in both the Photoshop world as well as the CAD world. But we don't want to be the only guinea pigs. So being at really close proximity to our university, we were able to kind of crowdsource a lot of testing. And so we would have these open nights where we'd set up VR. Back in 2014, it was very novel, right? So you'd set up a Oculus DK1, and then in 2015, 16, you'd have the HTC Vive, and you just put people through that experience. And what was great is that you had a swarm of students who are looking at, in the master's program, thinking about how they redefine their creative workflow, how they redefine their artistic approach. And so they're experimenting. And I can't stress enough how important I feel students, artists, designers are when testing out an early stage product, because they're actually looking to stress test this thing. They want to push it to its limit. They're not falling back on conventional norms. They're not constrained or confined by industry. And at master's level, you get a flavor of people who have been in industry before and really want to run away from it, and people have never been in industry before, and so they just kind of completely free. So that also helped us govern like what was working, what wasn't working. But
the thought was going through my mind for like one of my next questions for you, which was that like, how do you get these entrenched industrial designers and engineers who are so used to their technology and their CAD to switch to look at the opportunity, where someone like me, who basically I have great design skills and all of that, but I usually express it, sketch it, right, to Tom, and then he takes it for the rest of the way, or we collaborate from that point forward. So like our process was, I was so frustrated with learning CAD because it was too time consuming for me that it inhibited my part of the creative process. So I could see how someone like me would be like, I can take this on. I could learn this. But I could see someone who's, very used to their CAD program being reluctant. So what did you find as you were testing it?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that we don't want to do is we don't want to replace CAD. That's not at all in our agenda. So Tracy, your role with Tom is very much still intact, but the distance between your idea and the finished product is much closer, because you're actually handing off a 3D sketch to Tom. He totally gets it when he pulls it up in whatever CAD software he's using. And more recently, we started to build integrations and bridges so that you could pull up a Rhino file out of a Gravity Sketch file directly. So you can just edit it at Tom's native environment, your native fluid sketching environment.
Ooh, that sounds like fun, because now you're talking our language here, because we do happen to be Rhino users in this office.
I suspect
so.
he might have looked.
He might have noticed that. Yeah. Oh, that's great. That I think really invites that collaboration, because so often that's what we've found over the years, that the engineers and the designers and the manufacturers, like they all get into their silos and they really aren't speaking the same language, and the design has difficulty in communication unless you're extremely good at the communication process. And that's what we've had to hone over the years in order to get through the vision and keep it moving through the process.
Yeah, exactly. On both sides, we both sketch, and that sketch is nothing but a communication tool. I mean, we're just communicating what's in our brains. We, use the most immediate means possible, which is 2D at the moment. But with the advent of this technology and the accessibility of this technology, we're able to do all that napkin doodling all the way through to like a really nice resolved industrial sketch, all in 3D, which removes the need to do like 7 or 8 different perspectives, right?
It does. You're right. And that's one of the things that I found very exciting, studying your software and seeing examples of objects that, people have created with it, is I really see the benefits, the creative benefits of literally just being in this 3D virtual environment and drawing in 3 dimensions, not just in 2 dimensions, all the different tools, and then the way you manipulate certain things. Like I was thinking back to, some of the office chairs that we've designed that have, a mesh fabric, but a plastic molded frame, and creating that frame and seeing some of the tools you guys have created where when you're drawing and creating, these forms, how you're able to push and pull them, manipulate them, and then have it simultaneously be symmetrical,
Yep.
and even as you're drawing, I mean, I was thinking, wow, that'd save a lot of time. You would, in conventional CAD, it can be very hard sometimes to create the actual form that you have in your mind's eye, but here it seems so easy to create it.
Absolutely. What we see, at least what I experience as well as a designer and engineer, is that once we move into the CAD phase or we want a digital 3D prototype, we actually start to land things that we're not quite comfortable landing yet. Like, what's this radius here, or how thick should this be? I mean, we're still in that kind of fuzzy phase, and we want to stay in that phase a little bit longer. And to be able to carry that into 3D is quite powerful. And that way you can push and pull things. And so that when you get to the point where you need to 3D print it or bring it to physicality, you can then address, hey, actually, we need to thin this wall. We need to, thicken this up a little bit here. But if you start from, those units and those dimensions, it does kind of stifle the creativity, or at least it stops fully being able to express yourself. So there's a nice little like area between the 2D and 3D CAD world that we think this sits really nicely within.
It sounds like it. It's also occurring to me that, Tom and I are very used to working remotely with our team. So we have a big team over in China and things like that we've utilized from time to time. And you can't always be there in person to collaborate. And right now there's a lot of remote working conversation going on. So does this have a multi-user virtual component? Like, can we collaborate using it at the same time?
Absolutely. So we've been actually testing this in a silo with one of our customers in the automotive space, and they have a design team in Turkey, one here in the UK, as well as Detroit. And you could probably guess it's only a number of companies that are based in Detroit.
That's okay.
I'm going through my role. I used to work in the
Yeah.
auto industry, going through it. Yeah.
And it's been great because what it wasn't really a technology constraint so much, especially with like the small size of data that we're actually producing at Gravity Sketch with our file format. It was mainly around the actual culture about this of design, and how do I restrict you from moving this curve but allow you to move this curve, right? So some of those problems that we were trying to solve, and that's really what's held us back from deploying this at a wider scale. But really great news is by the time this airs, we should have a beta version that's accessible to just about everyone in our network. So it should be testable for you guys in the very near future.
That fascinates me because we have had those issues before where the manufacturer wants to make adjustments to it, but they go too far, right?
Mhm.
And they create a use constraint or a problem with what we intended the consumers to be able to do. And it takes really watching the drawings, really watching the process. So if you could constrain those ahead of time and make sure that they can't be adjusted, then they have to be innovative and figure out a workaround. I
Yeah.
love that. I love that idea that you're taking it to that level. The other question I had is you were talking about your niece being able to access that and your mom. And I love that broad age range. Is it accessible from a pricing standpoint too? Are there various levels of it so that it's not just pros?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is another thing about launching a product in the VR space. The majority of people that VR is targeting right now, or most of these companies are targeting, is gaming, with the exception of potentially HP, has like a really deep seat in the enterprise industry. Like actually Oculus, Vive, all of these are packaged and branded as gaming consoles almost. So for us to really gather a wide breadth of users to test once we are outside of academia and more in like the remote testing kind of a phase, we need to offer something that allows people to get easy access, start using it in a more casual way. And we also need to make sure our UX layer is accessible enough as well, right? So it's easy enough to jump in and start sketching. And so it's really been a product of that and bringing more people into the ecosystem before this becomes like the third display on your desk as an engineer. so we can define exactly what feels right. And going back to that UX problem or question you asked me earlier, that's what we've been focusing on is really amassing a lot of people to the platform, getting them to use it, understand how it's used, give us feedback. They may not be our core end users, but they can engage and enjoy the experience just alike.
Well, I also think it's a great entry point. I've written a lot of articles on this. Tom knows that, that when you come in at that younger age group, especially, as you're talking about college students, which is fantastic. I mean, when we've told the story on the show before, but when we were in college, CAD systems were brand new. So while we had a CAD lab that everyone had access to at Rhode Island School of Design where we went, what happened was it wasn't a part of the curriculum yet. Because the teachers hadn't had an opportunity, the professors had an opportunity to integrate it into the programs. So we were at that cut at that edge of it. And I think that's where VR is as well. It's not integrated into most programs, but to create that access at it starts to get someone thinking about the design process with it included in it.
Absolutely. And what we've seen with academia is we've seen students go out and purchase the headset themselves because it's half the price of an iPad, right? So they've gone out, purchased a Quest headset. Our product is, I think it's roughly $30 on the Quest store right now. I'm thinking in pounds at the moment, but
that's okay. It's close enough.
So they've almost flipped it. They've went out and got the hardware themselves, started to implement themselves, and now they're introducing it to their instructors. And so we actually get a lot of migration from the students to the instructors to us, as opposed to us going out and reaching out to them.
Same thing in 3D printing, right? That's exactly the model we saw going on early on in 3D printing. So I think that's really great.
So while I can completely relate to the benefits of this tool from a creative perspective and a communication perspective, and a workflow in the earliest stages of design, I'm curious to ask a little bit more, on a technical level about either what you're already achieving or what you're planning to do in terms of workflow, taking it from that sketch to then reality. I know you mentioned a little bit about it, but a little more detail. I mean, because it struck me from what I saw anyway, while the creative opportunities are there and to realize what's in your mind's eye, I was not really sure how accurately, sized things are. How easy is it to do that in Gravity Sketch, or is that not important? Is it really just proportion more than specific accuracy, and does that happen later? Can you help share a little bit about your intention there?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I'll say is whenever you build a tool, it's really the users who define what that tool is used for. And we've realized that more now than ever with thousands, tens of thousands of users on the platform now. Wow. So initially it was very much so, hey, this is just about form finding, figuring out the right shape and proportion, and then go and scale it in another tool somewhere else. And more we're getting people that actually don't have any pre-existing CAD knowledge and want to understand the proportions, the measurements, and this is a real demand. And so what we don't want to do is recant on some of the things that we said we were going to keep as our guiding principles. And so what happens is we spend a lot of time figuring out how do you proportion things and make it feel natural and make it feel easy and make it feel intuitive. And a tape measure, for example, is one of the things that we've been working with right now. It's still not perfect because how you measure something from a very large distance, do you have to scale it down first or whatever? So that's one aspect of it, is that the user starts to define what the actual tool is used for. And so we need to address these things. Another aspect here is we've created everything on top of NURBS, which is non-uniform rational B-splines, essentially the underlying maths that's accessed through SolidWorks, Rhino, and a plethora of other CAD packages. So you can export seamlessly into another package. Likewise, you can import something in. So what we try to encourage users to do more than try to measure out everything before they start sketching is, hey, why don't you bring in a mannequin, bring in a chassis of a car, bring in the rough tooling bed for your 3D printer, and then use that as the volume that you want to sketch within. So that way you understand some rough proportions, but you don't necessarily need to focus on the numbers. So there's an area here that we still need to work on, Tom. I'll be honest about that. But we do capture workflows and we do kind of figure out ways of going around that. And I think that's where the creatives are best. And hopefully we don't need to figure it out. It's the students, it's the creatives in the community that are helping us figure that out.
Well, that's fantastic. And don't get me wrong, I wasn't trying to take anything away from what you guys are doing or have done. I think it's fantastic. I am Rhino as my primary CAD software just because the age I am and when I started and what I learned along the way. And, you know, it's not perfect by any means either, but it is grounded in finite, you know, tangible mathematics that
Yeah.
you can actually manufacture things that do fit and interface with other parts existing or created, whatever. And so I'm thrilled to hear that you can go back and forth between the two, because I could see myself easily 3D sketching in
Absolutely.
your software and bringing it into Rhino, and then bringing that, you know, making whatever, well, just as a creative process, and then getting it to the point from there, having that framework to work with to create something that is, you know, a completely closed object that I can then have made, right?
Yeah, I mean, Rhino was our number one inspiration on the 3D CAD side. It's absolutely the way that they've built the product, the way like their philosophy. I mean, Bob McNeil, you know, he's been at it forever. He's not a get rich quick kind of guy. He's really bringing a community around the product, and it's actually the community that's helping define what Rhino is. I mean, with the recent Grasshopper integration, and that's something that we want to also build and be aspired to. So we want to belong to the Rhino family, but also create a family around Gravity Sketch of additional plugins in the future. And, you know, if there's a specific 3D printing workflow, you know, who better than someone from the community to help determine how that should roll out? And so we're kind of in the same line of vision. And something that we've done to even bring our two worlds closer is we've created a plugin. So you can take a Gravity Sketch file, drag and drop into Rhino. It repopulates like for like using Rhino's CAD engine. So you don't even have to worry about clicking and converting anything. It's all there. Layers are exactly as you left in Gravity Sketch. And so you can just pick up just where you left off in Gravity Sketch, but in Rhino.
Well,
That'd
that's
be a lot
a
of
pleasant
fun.
surprise, because I didn't know that researching for this interview. So that's really nice to hear. I like the product even more.
I know, seriously.
So
Well,
what's the best headset that I need to buy here?
yeah. So, but you know, the one before we get to that, because I do want to get to that, but you know, so this sounds like a lot of democratization of design, which I love, because you know, this is my thing. Like, I don't know, someday in my retirement, I'm gonna learn CAD. I don't know,
Oh, you're
but
not.
now I'm not.
No.
Now I'm just gonna go use Gravity Sketch and like go for it that way or something, you know. So thank you for that, because you know, in the back of my mind, I've always thought this is holding back like my vision. I can't get it all the way through. So you're creating the ability to do that, and I absolutely love that. But thinking about that, like how that goes all the way through to it, have you guys are you working on that sort of 3D print process? Because if I could just skip Rhino and skip all of that, then I can go straight into 3D print. Now I can start to visualize what I'm looking at, what I want, and you know, assuming it's small enough. But
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. And we've actually explored that quite a bit, especially in early days of Gravity Sketch, where, you know, you think about 2014, well, 2015 was that 3D printing year, right? It's a lot of things happened in the industry. And so
Yeah.
it was something that we couldn't close our eyes around. But what we realized when we started to dive into that 3D printing ecosystem was that you kind of have to understand what type of printer you're going to use, what type of technology, what type of material, and that like you can't really design for 3D printing without understanding that that digital manufacturing process. So we haven't really built in intuitive tools to help, you know, go straight from Gravity Sketch to printing. But what we have done is for the person that has that inherent knowledge, they can actually create a pretty watertight mesh within Gravity Sketch, and they can then export that as an OBJ and take that directly to Cura or whatever slicing software they'd like. We've also recently implemented, or I would say like half a year ago, implemented subdivision modeling, which allows you just to push and pull quads instead of triangles, and that's always going to remain closed as long as you stitch that together. So you have much more confidence in the fact that whatever you made in Gravity Sketch will be kicked out to a printer competently. And every stroke in Gravity Sketch is actually a small tube, and it's a closed small tube. So even if you were to make like a mess of strokes, that's all fully watertight, each individual stroke. So you can print
That actually makes so much sense when you think about it, because you're not a two-dimensional environment. You're a three-dimensional environment. So why should any line be just a
Okay.
line in theoretical space?
Exactly.
With no volume to it? It should have some no matter what scale, it should have some volume. There's that
sounds like
must
I
have been
still
an
need you
epiphany
though.
there. That's actually brilliant.
Yeah, it sounds like I still might need Tom, which is good. And we
Mhm.
still have a partnership going
Yeah,
on here
that is
for the
good.
3D print process. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now, you know, to get to Tom's question. So like, did you create this so that it's like tech agnostic from a hardware standpoint, or did you make it device specific? Like, how does that work for you?
Yeah, well, again, being in the VR ecosystem and us raising money as a startup in that ecosystem, we really need to show that we can have credible growth. And the best way to do that is to be agnostic. Essentially, every VR device out there, we even explored and experimented with Magic Leap in the AR space. And we have an iPad product that's currently in the works, so that will come out relatively soon. The idea is that, again, it's democratic, and it's not to move towards a point where you don't need Tom and Tom doesn't need Tracy, but it's to create a much more synergetic workflow between you two, and so that you guys can actually produce far better products far faster. And so in order to do that, VR doesn't just exist in a silo. It exists next to your desktop computer, it exists next to your iPad, next to your iPhone or smartphone, whatever it may be. And so we want to make sure that we create an experience that can transition between those those 3 or 4 different types of devices. And we've recently just created also a cloud platform where you can send up the model and then you can bring it down and view it on your phone or view it on your tablet.
Well, that's going to make remote team working even better as well. So great for you.
Absolutely.
I'm really glad you talk about that, because I think that the more successful companies who succeed, and we've seen that through the 3D print sort of hype cycle and all of that, is that the ones that remain broad in what they do really has created, I don't know, a better bridge to all the things that everybody's already using, and less objections in the process. So a better business overall. We talked a little bit earlier though about the HP products, and do you guys use the backpack and the
Yeah,
have you tried them?
we've actually asked HP for a loaner, and I think we got stuff with the current lockdown situation on getting our hands on one of
So
those,
yeah,
unfortunately.
because I'm the backpack sounds really cool, and so there's some ideas like how much freedom is that going to create in that sort of process, and how much fun is that going to be? So yeah, we'll have to hear. You'll have to give us a little update or send us a video once you manage to get one and show us how that's working. But the last thing that I really want to do is people like to understand how it's being used. Do you
Mhm.
have some use cases or a use case that you could share with us?
I have a few use cases, and I know we're a little bit tight on time. But I'll try to rattle through 4 use cases that I find really compelling and really exciting. There's the obvious automotive use case, which is absolutely cool. We get to be in a lot of really amazing automotive design studios from Italy to Detroit, and what they end up doing is they bring in the car chassis. So usually you have like a wheelbase that you're going to start from. If it's a combustion engine or electric vehicle, you're starting from some sort of rough engineering diagram or dimensions, and then you have safety requirements and all that stuff, right? So you could bring in all that information to Gravity Sketch from whatever CAD system you're using. It's usually CATIA, and then guys are just sketching on top of it, creating like loads and loads and loads of iterations. So they'll create like 7 or 8 different vehicles as a wireframe kind of sketch in Gravity Sketch, and then they'll have design conferences and
Way
reviews.
faster than clay modeling,
Abs-
which is, I mean, I've
absolutely.
seen it because I used to work in that industry.
Absolutely. But the most interesting and compelling use case was when one of the designers just pulled himself up into the driver's seat, and he really did an ergonomic study. It wasn't even about creating the actual design. He just was like, okay, this is how far I need the steering wheel. This is how far I need the shifter. And so it's like the designer at 1-to-1 scale at napkin sketch phase, being able to understand where things belong in the cockpit of the vehicle. And I found that absolutely amazing. Another use case on the same vein was a drone manufacturer who's bringing in the CAD model from SolidWorks, and they were doing all the cabling. So they're zooming themselves up to the size of the ant, and they're doing all the cabling within the model, then exporting the IGES file, and then essentially applying the cabling in the CAD package. So they were able to do all the cable routing in Gravity Sketch because it's much more intuitive to do 3D cable routing.
I would think, seeing what I've seen visually about how your tool works, drawing that line, the right diameter is the cable, routing that. I mean, my gosh, it'd be perfect.
And the 2 last cases are really around the industrial design workflow for the human body. So footwear has been a very interesting use case for us. And if you check our Instagram, you'll see a lot of great footwear examples. But we have, very professional footwear designers from some of the biggest brands using Gravity Sketch to explore concepts. And it's not so much about, I need to make this like manufacturable. It's more like, I'm a footwear designer. I don't really have a trusted CAD package of choice. I've been mainly working in Illustrator, and now this is something that speaks to me, allows me to explore the 3D shapes that are in my head. With one footwear designer who's actually sent over a model to a factory in Vietnam who also use Rhino, and was able to shave off about 25% of his workflow by just communicating with that factory through 3D as opposed to through really precise 2D Illustrator sketches. And then the last example here is a little bit of culmination of everything. It's a designer who scanned in his head, and he brought up his head in Gravity Sketch, and he was able to create a helmet around his head. So the perfect ergonomic fit, exactly the dimensions of the foam and even the aerodynamic nature of the helmet, all custom and tailor-made. And I think that's the future of design, 3D printing, and virtual reality, being able to have that level of detail and customization. And our technologies are here now. I mean, we're seeing these use cases pop up all the time. So it's really about the designers who want to take the bull by the horns and run with it.
Ugh.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you for empowering designers.
Hey, absolutely. Thank you for supporting us. I mean, the community has definitely embraced us, and we're trying to do our best to do the same.
Wonderful. Well, all of you listening out there, we'll link to the Instagram, the videos, all of those things will be in the blog post for this episode. So you'll be able to find everything at 3dstartpoint.com. And you'll also be able to find all the links also at 3dstartpoint.com/HP. So Shay, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate your insights today.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate your time.